The world is full of uncertainties. Your data storage shouldn't be one of them. Meet the new NetApp All-Flash SAN Array, a simple solution for all your business-critical applications. The ASA delivers dedicated block storage with superior performance, data availability, and guaranteed efficiency, as well as integrated data protection. How good is it? We guarantee availability for not 4, not 5, but 6 nines. Yeah, you heard that right. Our all-flash SAN array delivers 99.9999% uptime. Worried about cybercrime? Don't be. With our new ransomware recovery guarantee for primary storage, backed by tamper-proof snapshots, you'll be able to recover your snapshot data in the event of a ransomware attack. NetApp guarantees operational simplicity, built-in security to manage and recover from ransomware threats, and efficiencies to meet or exceed your sustainability and savings goals. Get your data storage ready for the modern world. NetApp.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to NetApp On Air. As always, I'm your host, Nick Howell. Thank you so much for joining us on this Wednesday. We are back from the 4th of July break. As I told you guys in Discord, we were taking a couple of weeks off there, but we're back, and we're coming back with the thunder. I'm really excited about our guest today. It's a big shock for a lot of you that have been around the stuff that I've been doing for the last decade or so. You'll recognize this face and this voice if you've never met him in person before. But you may know him from other things that we've done in the past together, but we'll get to that in just a second. First and foremost, Insight registration is open. We do have, yes, that's right, Insight is back live in person this year, back at the MGM Grand like the old days. Very excited to be back there. There is early bird registration open right now. You can find the links over in Discord. I'll get Drew, if you don't mind, throw a link in the chat for us or give people a way to get to that page over there so you can find it. Basically, just go to insight.netapp.com. You can register there, and we do have discounts going between now, at least for the next few days, where you can get some early bird discounts to get in there. So make sure you get signed up, and we're very excited to see everybody at the MGM in Vegas on October 23rd. Some more information over at insight.netapp.com, and take advantage of those early bird pricing discounts while you can, while they last. We're going to be doing tons of fun stuff around Discord. We're going to be filming some stuff here for NetApp On Air at the show later this year, so make sure you follow things along with things there. And make sure you get into Discord, because that is where the easiest place to find it. It's where the community's at. We've got thousands of people in there at this point talking and loving about NetApp every day. We've got our engineers, executives, and product management all hanging out in there to answer your questions, capture any feedback, all of that kind of stuff. So really want to make sure everybody gets into that, because that's the hub of all the community at this point, man. All of that stuff in real time is happening over in Discord. And we've got our guest today. We've even got some of our partners from AWS, from VMware. All of those guys hang out in there as well. So come join Discord, mix it up with us, make sure you have a good time while you're in there. And of course, every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, we are here live on YouTube, Twitch, and LinkedIn. We're live streaming over there by popular demand. People wanted us to live stream it to LinkedIn, so we got you covered. Shout out to everybody over on LinkedIn. We see you guys over on Twitch. And what's up, YouTube? We see you guys as well. And not to forget, we are also live streaming it to our Discord community as well, so you can watch along with the watch party in there every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific. That would be 1 p.m. Eastern, if I'm doing my maths right. Next week, we are going to have Mr. Andy Krudge, who is the product manager from AWS for FSx ONTAP. So you won't want to miss that one, especially following today's episode, because there are some fundamental things that we're going to go over today that will also apply to some of the things that we're going to talk about next week. But enough rambling on for me. Enough chatter. Let's bring on the guest, the one and only Mr. Glenn Sizemore. Glenn, how you doing, sir? Welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Hey, Nick. Hey, man. Good to talk to
Long
you again,
time
buddy.
no see. It's been about, 10 years since you and I... no, we did something at VMworld last year. Or, excuse me.
Yeah.
VMware Explore.
You can call it VMworld. We come on. It's fine.
It'll always be VMworld to me.
it'll always be VMworld in your heart. But yeah, no, we got the original OG band back together at Explore last year. You, me, and Pete. But
all we needed to do was go find Gabe, man, and then that would have been. Woo, whew. For those that know, you know. But for those that don't, Glenn and I used to do what was known as the NetApp Communities podcast, and that eventually became what you now know as the Tech ONTAP podcast, still hosted by our lovely Justin Parisi today. That's still ongoing. Good Lord, 10, 12 years later, somehow that thing is still chugging along every week, and it's very nostalgic for me to look back at it and think about how I really just fired up TalkShoe one day and I just did it with my earbuds. It was crazy what that thing became. But I have so many memories with you and Pete of doing that show in the various countries at various shows, whether it was a VMworld or an Insight or any of the other shows that we would find ourselves at, constantly bringing that. And that's really kind of what I wanted to do, an updated version of that, modern version of that, in a live stream format where we could actually interact in a live way with the audience here. So thank you very much for agreeing to be a part of this and coming on. You were a big part of our Insight digital version last year, alongside Andy, who I was just mentioning, doing a lot of stuff, going over VMC and doing a roundtable Q&A with Andy in an open format like that. But I'm excited to have you back here on the new show, on a new format, to go over and just chat with you and rap with you about a lot of things that I personally have questions on that I'm not sure where things came from. So how did you find yourself at VMware? How did you end up in the place with VMC? And kind of give us some of the origin stories of where VMC really came from, if you don't mind. Like, fill me in on some of that.
Yeah, so if we go all the way back 7 years ago now, I was working at NetApp at the time in the FlexPod team. And was very happy, building on-premises data center infrastructure powered by ONTAP and doing a lot of good work there. But one thing that I kind of saw a shift towards is this, the more I talk to customers, the more the whole concept of shifting to a managed offering kept coming up. Right. It was like, look, yeah, your software's great, but I'm trying to reduce the operational complexity here. I don't want to have so many knobs, right? I want the result. And the thing that I kept coming back to is more and more customers were looking to not buy a product, but they were looking to purchase an outcome. And
that's a good way to put it. I like that.
Yeah, right. You show up a certain amount of money and something happens as a result, right? Instead of, you show up with some money, you buy some software, and then you figure out how you're going to make that happen. There's some advantages there. You can do some things, right? When you're working inside one of these frameworks or a managed service, there's some boundaries, there's some restrictions, but those boundaries and restrictions come with a big benefit of a reduced administrative burden. You don't have to think about it as much. There's less knobs to manage, et cetera, et cetera. So anyways, along comes VMware, and they make this announcement of VMware Cloud on AWS. And given everything that I had done over my entire career, it was just, I really kind of was smitten by the idea of VMware and Amazon coming together. So I went and looked at the job offerings. Lo and behold, they were looking for somebody to work on the product. And I went and applied on a whim, like, oh, we'll see what they say. And nevertheless, I got the job. So I joined the VMware Cloud and AWS team and was there for the first release. So they announced it before I joined the team, but I was on the team by the time we actually released that first version. And I've been with them now through 22 releases. So it's been a wild ride, man.
And in what capacity? Did you come in the capacity you're in currently, or was that something that evolved over time?
No, I originally came in. I did tech marketing for all things storage. So I answered any storage related question any customer would have anywhere in the service.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Given my background and whatnot.
You're right.
So I did that for about 3.5, 4 years. And then there was an opening on the product management side. And, at that point I'd been doing tech marketing, TME work for 15 some odd years. And I had always told myself I was going to be a product manager one day. And here came this position that opened up in the product that I was so passionate for. right? This thing that I believed in. Once again, I tipped my hat and said, well, I'll put in for that. We'll see what's the worst that can happen. They'll say no. And to my surprise, they said yes. So here we are 2.5 years later, and I'm responsible for VMware Cloud and AWS.
Holy smokes, man. They let a wild man in there. No, I'm just kidding. There is something about you that I love, that like just the way that you sort of hold things together and the way that your calm approach to it. I don't know if it's your background previous to joining the vendor community or what that might be, but it's just the way that you kind of conduct yourself just lends it to being a product manager and sort of executing and seeing things through. You're an execution machine. That's one of the things I've always appreciated about you, is that you don't really let things get in your way. It's just A plus B, if then else, in a lot of ways, when it comes to you. So yeah, I'm very excited to hear about that.
Thank you.
I love to hear about the evolution of how we traditionally ran VMware on-prem, which is still going on today. We're vSphere 8 now. I'll say this: it's been interesting to see the circle back to vSphere, with a focus on vSphere. I'll say, just from an end user perspective, like looking at it as, I feel like there was a lot of squirrels in different directions, whether it was going back to vRealize or NSX and a lot of these different places that would pull you sort of auxiliary or off to the side. I can feel it's palpable. You can feel the refocus on vSphere, and I don't know if that was intentional or if it's just happened that way. But from my perspective, just my own personal opinion, I can certainly feel that. Is that a real thing, or am I crazy?
So I think it is a real thing, but I think there's a couple of different things that are happening kind of at the same time here, right? First and foremost, you have to execute engineering execution from marketing highlighting, right?
Right.
There's the things that engineers work on, and then there are the features that we choose to market and promote. And the marketing and promoting bucket is never everything that's being done, right? Because there's only so much attention out there. You only have so much time, and it's not like everyone can afford to just sit around and listen to you talk for 12 hours a day, which is what it would take if you were actually trying to get everything out there. So, if you go past the past 10 years of VMware, you will absolutely see what looks like these kind of big pivots, where all of a sudden everything's all about Tanzu and we're all in on Kubernetes. And then, we bought an Exenta and it's all about NSX and software-defined networking. And then it's VCF and we're going to do on-prem STDC management. And then it was VMC and we're going to do managed cloud services.
No,
right?
Datrium backups.
No, exactly. But in the background, the core, the thing that always had the most attention and is the majority of our install base, it's the majority of our attention span, has always been vSphere, right? What's really shifted here is customer focused has really, in a palpable way, gone back to their existing on-premises data centers. And this isn't the first time we've seen this. It's kind of funny from my perspective. There was already the great cloud repatriation once, where everyone moved all their data to the cloud. They got the bill for a couple of years and said, on second thought, and they pulled it all back on premises. Yeah. But then there was some cost savings. There was a lot of efficiencies made. The actual offers which you could get in these hyperscaler environments were improved, so that a lot of customers started to move to a permanent hybrid deployment, where they're going to have existing on-premises data centers. They're never going away. They're never going to close. It's an important part of their business and how they operate. But then they also have a point of presence in not just one cloud environment, often 2 or 3, right? Well, where they're invested a little bit in Azure for this workload, and they've got a little bit of GCP for workload Y, and a lot of AWS for something else. And it's in this new kind of hybrid world where VMware kind of took this 5-year journey to really establish itself in all of those markets. So as a customer, it doesn't matter where you're trying to go, right? If
all
you
of
want
the above.
Yeah. If you want to use all of them together and mesh it into one big hybrid environment, right? The technology is absolutely there.
Or just be specific and intentional about what workloads you want to run where is really the way I like to describe it. But yeah, I mean, since I know you're VMC and that's AWS, but let's not sleep on the fact that we've got Azure VMware Solution, AVS, in Azure. We've also got GCVE in Google Cloud. And combine the three of those with your on-prem stuff, and you've now got the ability to be very intentional about what workloads get. Maybe it's a regional thing. Maybe it's a particular set of staff that you have in a particular geo that needs to be in a certain regional data center for latency reasons. Maybe there's sovereignty issues at play, and there's all kinds of reasons. But the beauty is that you don't have to care, because both NetApp and VMware have these relationships with all three of the major hyperscalers.
Yeah, it's all about building an ecosystem where there is no Hotel California, right? It's ultimate customer flexibility. You do have to make one bet, right? You have to bet on VMware as your platform. Yeah. Just like, in the ONTAP ecosystem, right? You're betting on ONTAP as your data management platform. But once you've made that bet, then your next decision is inconsequential, right? You can just do a little bit of price shopping, do a little bit of comparison, right? What workload makes the most sense for you, and move there. You don't have the data gravity concerns. You don't have the co-location. It dramatically simplifies the experience for customers and increases their flexibility. And honestly, we see customers using that flexibility. I have VMware Cloud and AWS customers who are moving somewhere else. I'm also onboarding customers in AWS who are coming from AVS or from GCP. So we see customers taking advantage of that fluidity to move their workloads based on what makes the most sense of them now. Right? 3 years ago, it was a different answer, so they made a different decision.
Yeah, I think it's gotten to this point of, how do I want to say this? It's real. Like this, when we used to talk about this in a kind of unicorns and rainbows, kind of way, that this could be this panacea world that we would live in one day. And I look at it now, and I kind of turn around and look over my shoulder and go, wait, it's actually real? Like we can literally vMotion between AWS and my co-location facility? Yes. What? Like, that stuff to me is insane that it's possible, not to mention the fact that it's viable and it's affordable, in the grand scheme of things, compared to what we used to have to do with secondary data centers. And I think a lot of people sleep on this. The amount of money it used to that companies would spend up front, usually on an annual basis, to power, cool, even if it was in a colo and you were paying for a managed service, so to speak, in a different way. You were just paying for floor space and power and cooling. But you were still paying that sort of subscription fee, quote unquote, if you will, to host your stuff in there. You still had to keep maintenance on all that gear. You still had outages and downtimes and all of that stuff. It failed drives and all those server boards that would fail, like all kinds of stuff that you had to deal with. And when I hear people say that the bill's a little high when they, first fire up a cloud service, I go, yeah, you're not doing all the math. Because, I mean, while it can be high, yes, there's also an element of it that is like, I don't know if you're taking everything into account of what the alternative would cost you in resources, manpower, time, staffing, all of that stuff in order to run that stuff. So, any thoughts on that in a comparison perspective?
You're 100% correct. We have a cloud economics team here in VMware that specializes in doing TCO analysis for customers, and it's a formal engagement, right? When you pull them in, we sit down with you. Like, we ask a lot of questions. Like, we ask you how expensive your power is. We ask you what your typical level 1 support engineer costs you, right? How many downtimes a year do you typically get, right? Well, it's a big list of figuring out what your actual costs are, and comparing that against what we expect from a managed service. And it's like a 90% win rate when we actually sit down with a customer and go through the math. 90% of the time, the managed service is actually saving them money. and it's because of all those other costs. It's the embeds, and the biggest one, the one that's most important to me, right, is the opportunity cost, right? It's the only thing you can't buy is time, right? There's nothing you can do to get more of it. It is a finite resource that is forever going away, and there's never enough of it. And the one real big advantage of a managed service is it gives you the ability to get time to your teams, because you can get work off their plates, right?
Yeah.
If you're managing a secondary colo right now, you've got to keep all of that patched. You've got to keep it all updated. You've got to test it, right? You've got to manage it. Otherwise, what's the purpose of this environment? If you can't trust it, if it's not ready for a failover, it's pointless. So we see a ton of business where customers are just taking their second data center and moving that into a managed offer, right? Just to simplify that part of the problem. And that little bit gives them back the resources so that they can get onto their next project, their new app, the new endeavor, right? And spend a little bit less time just keeping the lights on and a little bit more time getting to actual business value, which at the end of the day, like, the business rewards. They're not interested in the fact that you're maintaining this super slick secondary data center. They just said, don't let the services go down. It's not interesting.
It's a cost center. It's just all it is. Like, and that's the thing. There was an epiphany that I had probably about 5 or 6 years ago, like 2019, I would say. So what, 4 years ago? And it was when I was talking to someone at AWS, and they were telling me that they don't care about infrastructure anymore. And I was like, what? Like, how could you possibly not care about him? And they're like, we deal in workloads. And it took, and if you ever talk to AWS, that will kind of get, a little bit beaten in your head. Talk to anybody that's worked at AWS or works at AWS, it'll be a little bit browbeaten. But once you get over the hump of that being infrastructure dinosaurs that we are, you start to realize that everything that you just rattled off goes away, and that teams can now just focus on workloads, keeping them online, keeping them updated, iteration on new updates and features, and they don't have to care. To me, that was always sort of the promise of cloud, was that I don't want to have to care. And I think the whole workload conversation started with VMware. Because I can remember, like, when we would talk about a workload, it was usually a stack of physical gear that was self-contained in client-server world 20 years ago. VMware brought about the idea that we could abstract that and talk about workloads, a VM, or a set of VMs, combined with some networking and storage services behind the scenes. Now we abstract one layer further, and we've now got, like, pure workloads that are running in containers. I mean, we've gone to Lambda functions at this point. Like, there's all kinds of stuff beyond this stuff that is just completely, purely focused on workloads. And that's the way I look at it. The first thing I usually try to talk to at a customer. And they love the idea that they can do that with VMware. It doesn't matter whether it's in AWS, on-prem, in Google Cloud, or in Azure. The workload stays the same. It's sort of universal and agnostic to whatever platform it's running on. And I think that's what, especially in the short term, that's what we're going to see a lot of people depend on as they make this transition over the course of the next 5 to 10 years of being a more hybrid sort of deployment with all of their workloads. We're going to see that mindset shift, and we're going to see people's careers shift. We're going to see a lot of transition happen. It's already started, but we're just getting started.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's already upon us.
Yeah. It's one of the, whenever I go into a customer and I talk with a senior executive, CIO, or an IT director, it's never a technology discussion.
No.
That's the funny thing that I've experienced over the last couple of years especially. It's always, my guys don't know how to do AWS. Or we don't want to have to run infrastructure anymore because that requires me to have extra headcount. It's a people and process problem more than it is a technology problem.
Yeah, and I think you see that manifest in the vendor space amongst your vendors themselves. Like there's a common. It's interesting. There's this tension that we run into all the time, consistently when we look at like Explorer, and I'm sure you guys get it for Insight. When we look at feedback, the number one thing that we hear is more technical sessions, right? Like the people who are in attendance, they want to go in the weeds. They want to go back to the good old days when you would sit in a 90-minute session that just covered how vMotion works.
And I would need a nap afterwards, right?
Yeah. Like give me 20 minutes on change block tracking. Like I'm really interested on exactly how this synchronizes.
Yeah.
But that's not how this industry works anymore, right? Like even if you're super into the technology, outside of very specific use cases, are you given the leniency to actually go deep dive on any one feature? So what you see is this and we started talking about this a little bit with the marketing at the top. You see these focuses on big grandiose visions, and it's because it's a quick way to communicate a lot of information, right? So like VMware Managed Cloud is a quick way of communicating. If you already know what the word VMware means, then the rest of that is a self-explanatory sentence, and there will be follow-on questions and discussions that will lead to us getting all the way down into the minutia weeds of, well, do you support VMFS? Do you support iSCSI? Do you support vVols? Yeah. Like what about 4.2? Like that eventually
it becomes a compatibility checklist.
Yeah, and it gets down into those weeds. The technology hasn't changed, and at the end of the day, you still need to know about the features. You still need to know like how to do snap mirror and cloning and all that fun jazz. But that's not where the conversation starts, because that's from the customer side. That's not where the conversation's starting. They don't show up and ask about, well, what's your cool technology, right? Like they show up with a workload and a requirement, and they want to know which technology that you have as a vendor that would be applicable to that particular problem.
Yeah. Well, speaking of getting into the weeds, let's get into the weeds a little bit.
Sure.
Help me and the audience understand, how does VMC work? How am I able to run ESX hosts, which I'm assuming are just going to be fancy EC2 instances, or are we talking about dedicated hardware, or I don't have to care?
Yeah, so the origin of VMware Cloud started as a technology meeting between VMware and Amazon, where Amazon shared with VMware that they were working on this new platform, Nitro EC2, that would provide bare metal capabilities, where you could put an operating system directly on top. Previously, EC2 virtual instances were basically just Amazon's version of VMs. And that's not interesting if you're running a hypervisor that needs access to bare metal hardware. But with the metal instances, that you get exactly that, right? You're logically deploying an operating system. You get all the flexibility of EC2 deployments. It's still an AMI. It still has the same management, the same control planes, the same observability and monitoring. But at the end of the day, once you drop your operating system on top of it, that OS has direct access to the processor, the direct access to the memory controllers, and it gives us the ability to do all of the technology that we do. So we were very interested in this technology, and it wasn't released yet, but we went all in and said, yeah, we want to build something on top of this, and started building the VMware Cloud service. Now, the next thing that we kind of ran into was the AWS networking. It looks so much like a traditional data center network that it's easy to look at it and say, like, well, a VPC is just a layer 2 subnet. But the reality is there's a lot of nuance in there. Yeah, it's a different beast. And the magic sauce that really enabled us to deploy vSphere inside an AWS environment was NSX. It was that software-defined network overlay that could run on top of a VPC and give us multiple VLANs and the ability to lay a data center network inside the EC2 infrastructure, even in a multi-AZ deployment.
Yeah, you can even span VPCs at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was kind of a 1-2 punch, right? The Nitro platform from EC2 combined with NSX gave us the building blocks to be able to provision vSphere inside the AWS cloud. Now, we've had some customers say, well, why don't you just give me the hypervisor and let me do the rest like I do on premises? And the reason we don't do that is because the complexity required to actually get this stack up and running is not trivial. There's a lot of juggling that happens in the early phases of stand up, where you start with vSphere host, and then you got to get vCenter on top of it, and then you got to get NSX there, and then you can wire up all the networks, and then you can finish configuring your cluster. It's if this was an NVA, right, it'd be 700 pages of just nothing but text commands. So it's
or a PowerShell script that you used to write. You used to have a big PowerShell script for the FlexPod, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. Like this stuff is all modern declarative state deployments as it is. But
so where does the line stop from what I'm able to access because we deal with this with FSx as well for clarity, right? So where is the line between what VMware manages for you and what you're responsible for?
So the easy way to think about it is VMware manages from the hardware down. Right, okay. From the hypervisor down, and as a customer, you manage from the VM up.
So do I have ESX CLI access on an individual host, or is that too far below? Okay.
Yeah. Gotcha. Nope. You're not accessing hosts.
Gotcha.
You have a delegated administrative permissions on vCenter, and through that, you can do almost everything, right? But like you can't get in and configure vSAN services. You can't get in and muck with DRS settings or HA settings. All of that is just managed for you. So it gets back to that administrative uplift.
So I can't go in and fine tune DRS recommendations in vCenter.
Correct. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
We have other ways that you can manage those types of workloads. We have a platform called Compute Policies that lets you build similar rules as you would in DRS to manage placement using the DRS engine so that you can control what VMs will run where. But
it's more intelligent placement, though, than sort of reactionary moves.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a different approach, and at every phase, as we've built this service over the past 5 or 6 years now, customers would come to us and say, well, on premises, I do this. So how would I do this in VMC on AWS? And in some cases, it was a simple answer of, oh, you do the same thing, right? In other cases, we had to go build new features into the platform, which meant improving vSphere. And then those improvements will eventually make their way back on premises to our existing customers. So
can you give me an example of one of those that have gone through that cycle, something that users might recognize that was born as a sort of requirement for VMC that made its way back into vSphere 8, for example?
Well, probably one of the most recent ones, something that's still on its way, making it permanently coming all the way back, is support for NConnect and the NFS protocol, right? Like that isn't needed in traditional on-premises data center networks because customers just move their storage traffic to a dedicated VLAN. If they need bandwidth, they put it on a dedicated NIC, and you don't have to worry about session limitations. You can just throw hardware at the problem. You can get more bandwidth on the connection. So like up until I had to operate NFS data stores inside the AWS EC2 infrastructure, I never thought about the fact that an NFS connection is a single TCP/IP session because it was never a problem. Right. I could max out an all-flash array over that single connection, driving sufficient client protocol. But once you move it into EC2, now all of a sudden there's this global session throttle that is capping you at 5 gigabits per second and limiting your performance to 500 megabytes a second. And the only way to get around it is to open multiple connections, right? So we had to
So that was something that was born in VMC.
It never gets added if VMC isn't a feature because it never makes like at the end of the day, there's the spec, like what the technology can do, and then there's what customers are asking you for. And as a product manager, you just it's not about what you want to do, it's what customers are asking for. and trying to deliver the squeakiest wheels and put out the largest fire with the least amount of water, right? And in this instance, I don't think NConnect ever makes the cut list, and I mean ever, from something that VMware is interested in if it's not for our managed cloud service. But having made that investment, having done the work to add the protocol extension, right? It's in core vSphere. It's not like we're running a different hypervisor inside the cloud. This is the same exact thing that we sell you. It's just something that we're managing. So it just makes sense to finish it. Now, in this case, there's a little bit of additional work that the team wanted to complete before they formally support it on premises, but it's already in the U1 build. It's not officially supported, but if you're William Lamb and you know how to find the APIs, you can configure it right now today, and it works fantastically.
Nice. But widespreadly available soon, TM?
Oh, yeah. I think it's, I'm not sure what exact release it's going to come in, and I don't want to make any firm commitments for obvious reasons.
Right.
But it's on its way to the on-premises release. And there's a bunch of examples like that. Like I mentioned earlier, DRS rules, right?
Yeah.
They started, compute policies is the next generation of DRS rules. It uses tags instead of having to configure specific rules that say VM1 cannot coexist with VM2. You would just have a VM tag 1 and a VM tag 2, and by tagging a VM with those tags, DRS would interpret it the same way. That was born in the cloud, but is now something that is coming on premises with customers. And there's honestly countless examples of that, where we started something inside VMC because we had a unique requirement, but that requirement was applicable to on-premises customers as well, so we don't restrict it. It's just, where does it ship first? And vice versa. There are features that we introduce on-premises and then evaluate and determine that they're not necessary and they don't make sense in a cloud environment. For example, HCI mesh, right? The ability to mount a vSAN data store across multiple different clusters. We could have.
You said the word.
Yeah. Hey, man, it's all inside the VMware family, right?
I hear you.
We evaluated it and we didn't really find a benefit to VMC on AWS, so we decided to not support it. Right? We don't support the iSCSI target or vSAN file services, like all these various different features that are technically available inside the platform, but we don't make available inside the managed offer because we have other options that are more economical, more performant, make more sense. Right, like that's the whole point of I always like to say the thing that makes the VMware Cloud and AWS offer unique and special is not what we built, but who we built it with. Right. It's the fact that this is taking the VMware pedigree of VMware vSphere and overlaying it on top of the world-class data center operations that is AWS EC2, and it's combining those two things together that produces something that's special. And I think you guys actually get a very similar story based on my own evaluations with FSx for NetApp ONTAP.
It's great. It's a perfect segue because I was going to lead into sort of tell me about the first time you heard about FSx and sort of what your reaction was. And now that it's out and everybody's supported and everybody's knows about it, we can sort of kind of fun retrospectively talk about it. And I love kind of going back down. So I mean, we were working on that for a couple years before people heard about it. Like that was, and I'm curious where you picked up, where you were first sort of told about it, and what went on in your mind when you heard that you now have access to NFS on NetApp again in the cloud.
Well, one of my first briefings, one of my first questions was, does this support SnapMirror? And when they said yes, it was a all caps, we're all in. Because it's just it made perfect sense at that point. With my own history and knowledge of the data fabric and ecosystem and everything, that's all I needed to know. It's like, okay, well, this is a fully empowered version of Data ONTAP that can do everything ONTAP can do. Okay, we're done. Yes, sold.
And we actually allow people to go down to FSx admin.
Well, you can go down to FSx admin
or VS admin for those that are NetApp people. Yeah,
but you're not doing aggr commands or anything like that.
No.
Not getting down
There
to
is
the
a
node
point
CLI.
where you don't need to worry about that.
Yeah,
create your volumes, create your SVMs. You're good.
And I think again, and this is why I use it as an analogy, and why I think these two offers pair so well together. Because if you're a FlexPod customer and you're looking at your existing on-premises infrastructure, right? You're managing the storage, you're managing the network stack, you're managing the hypervisor, and then you're managing the workload. Where if you move into VMC on AWS using the managed offer and then lay in FSxN, what are you now responsible for? Well, you're responsible for the storage configuration, but that's it. You're not doing upgrades. You're not doing updates. You're not doing maintenance. You're not doing break fix. You're not worrying about drive stability, right? This is the config. It's declarative. Once you've got it set up, and you can use a declarative model to get it set up so that you don't even have to think about that either. Then you just move on and you let the managed service deal with the rest of it. And the same is true inside VMware. You think about your VMs, right? And it's declarative. Once the VMs exist, then the rest of it is just managed for you. If a host fails, we repair it, right? Like you get an email telling you that the host has been replaced with the new serial number in case you care. But there was zero action on you as a customer. When there's a security vulnerability announced, right? Like when everyone else gets the emergency email that a new security update is dropped, and they're scrambling to try to get their patch situation and figure out what the mitigation plan is now that this thing is known. Managed cloud service customers get an email that says, yeah, it's already been patched. You're safe, right? It's a completely different way of thinking about it. And it's I don't know if this analogy works for you, but the one that kind of works for me a little bit is it's kind of the difference between owning a house and living in a townhome, right?
I get where you're going.
Yeah, you have full freedom in a townhome. You can knock a hole in the wall, like you own the thing. You got a mortgage, it's got your name on it. But if there's something wrong with the roof, you don't care. That's not your problem.
There's landscaping and there's HOAs and stuff like that to take care of the maintenance of the place, right?
There's just a whole slew of issues that you don't have to think about. And there are trade-offs that come with that. But in a lot of cases, the reducing that administrative burden, that overhead, has benefits in and of itself. Yeah. That are the big reason why somebody considers a managed offering in the first place. Because, at the end of the day, if I'm being just completely transparent, if all you care about is price, and you are large enough to have an administrative team, owning a data center is always going to be the cheapest way that you can possibly operate, and there is no way to get around that. Now, new things that are temporary or may not be successful, buying a bunch of hardware for those doesn't make a lot of sense. But once you know that you're going to support a workload, it's going to run cheaper on a private data center forever. But that pure cost benefit comes with other trade-offs. And often the thing that you end up trading is time. You end up spending a lot of time managing this infrastructure, and that's time you can't spend somewhere else. So if you're willing to just spend a little bit more money, you can get back that time to then be able to apply to other projects and initiatives. Yeah. It's just a balancing act.
Absolutely. That's why, and it goes back to the thing I was saying before. Like a lot of the executives that I will talk to are usually having the decision of, do I train my staff or do I turn over my staff? It's never about the technology when it comes down to that stuff. And I love your point about cost. If you've already got the team and you've already got the gear and you've already got that stuff, you're going to have a hard time beating the cost of doing the fit. You may be able to do it more efficiently and more lightweight if you make other structural decisions about the team, your hires, who's going to run stuff. Are you offloading that to a partner? There's all kinds of different ways that you can approach things from that perspective. But so who is VMC not for? to be clear, is where I was going with that.
Yeah. So to be clear, if you were to actually fire the people, a managed service is always cheaper. But nobody ever actually does. What they do is they take those people and they move them on to new projects. And that's why I make the statement that on-premises is always good, because you've got the sunk costs of having a team in the first place.
Right.
Right. So to answer
You've
your
already
question,
paid that bill.
Exactly. Right. And so you might as well, it comes down to how are you going to use it from an efficiency perspective. To answer your question, though, the person who VMC is not appropriate for is somebody who needs something that it can't do. Right. Because, again, this is the double-edged sword, the other side of that razor blade that says, it's so much easier. It's so much simpler to operate. You don't have to think about this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of that's true right up until you show up at the front door and you say, hey, I'm using Fiber Channel on premises with vVols and I need a DR replica. And I want to use Snap SRM with VSR, and I want to do replication of my vVols containers. Hey, VMware, can I do that? No, you can't. We don't support that.
Yeah.
Right. And if you look at vSphere as a platform, like 100% of our customers use DRS, 100% of our customers use HA. As you start to get into those sub features, right? Like how many people are using fault tolerance, for example, it's a much smaller number. And if you just take a look at the managed service and what those managed services support, you'll very quickly discover the features that everyone uses. And the ones that we don't support are more niche. Now, they're still extremely valuable. They're still extremely powerful, right? Like if you need it, you need it. And there's no way around it. And in those scenarios, we have customers that come to us and they say, quite frankly, like, hey, this sounds great. I'd love to be able to take advantage of the managed opportunity here, but you just don't support my use case. And those are the customers that we have to politely recommend go take a look at maybe a VCPP partner who can build them something custom and give them the same management uplift and the same kind of managed experience, but with a more flexible support statement.
It's also if you're still running VMware on Fiber Channel, like cool, that works. You're gonna have a lot of trouble in the future with a lot of the cloud integrations because the way things have not started, but like we're 5 years into a massive. I get to see this stuff being in the storage side of the vendor market from like just different, analyst type stuff that you wouldn't normally see out in the world. The transition to file has been massive, mammoth. And as we've seen cloud adoption grow, so haven't we seen the adoption of file or the transition to file. VMware already stimulated that in the late 2000s with the introduction of 10 gig and NFS and support for data stores. Like that was one of the big reasons to transition to file. But looking back at it now, like the growth of file has hockey sticked over the last 3 to 5 years. And the only thing I can attribute that to is cloud. Cloud doesn't really run Fiber Channel. Cloud doesn't really run block that much outside of the managed ones like EBS, Azure Disks, right? So when we see people kind of transitioning, trying to layer on additional things onto their workflow sandwich like FSx ONTAP, VMC, and you want to do all of that in AWS, like trying to do that with block or even Fiber Channel or any of the other things, it just makes it so much harder on yourselves. Personally, if I were doing it, I would take the particular VMs I wanted to run in VMC, transition those, storage vMotion those over to a NFS data store, and then you could move those workloads back and forth, and you could have the best of both worlds, and then you'll fall in love with NFS on VMware, and you'll just throw Fiber Channel out the window, and you'll never touch it again because you don't need that kind of bleep in your life. At the end of the day, it's we're storage. We love Fiber Channel, but the cloud does not play particularly well with those sorts of technologies. And if you're looking to do stuff like these more advanced workload management platforms, I guess is the way I would describe it, you're going to have a little bit of a harder time, unfortunately. So maybe there's some things you could change before you start adopting those. Maybe there's switching infrastructure or storage infrastructure that you could change on the back end before, as a phase one step before you start to really make that leap.
Yeah, this is a conversation that I find myself having quite frequently these days with customers. Yeah, and it's the block to file barrier, right? If you guys want to do something really cool to make my life easier, give me a version of SnapMirror where I can change protocol in flight. That'd be great. Why don't you just take Project Shift back out of the Dustworks and reuse that technology? It'd be fantastic for me. Because I've got a bunch of customers that come to me and say, I'm using Fiber Channel or I'm using iSCSI, right? And I can't mount my block data store in a cloud environment unless you support block storage. And the counter argument to that is, look, I understand why you're using block storage in your on-premises data store, but you do understand you're moving to a managed service in a hyperscaler cloud environment, right?
Right.
Like, the entire reason to do this shift is to get focused on workload, to get everything siloed and isolated and cleaned up so that the administrative burden is reduced, so that it's easier to manage, easier to scale, right? And you don't get any of those benefits by moving block to block like that. You're just copying all of that legacy overhead with you as you come up and in. So it's a more appropriate way to look at the problem is, let's get our on-premises data center to something that looks closer to the cloud, and then we can go ahead and get that bidirectional replication going and whatnot. But at the same time, like, that is a really hard conversation to have. I mean, particularly as the managed storage provider, it's easier for me to come in and say, hey, why don't you just use NFS on premises, right? But I have had those conversations. Protocol bigots are a thing. It's up there with religion and topics that are best just left on the table, and don't bring it up as much as possible. If somebody wants Fiber Channel, you sell them Fiber Channel. You don't try to convince them why they're wrong. So it's a difficult conversation, but it's absolutely, like, that is one of probably the biggest inhibitors that I see these days, is customers who are looking to use one of our managed cloud environments for disaster recovery purposes, or as a hot site or an extension of on-premises. And the lack of VMFS block storage support across the board is just a big, it's a big problem from an adoption standpoint. But at the same time, it's not one that we're likely to reverse, just because it goes counterintuitive to a lot of the flows that we're trying to support. And it's not like we're trying to say that the managed service is all things to all people, right? That's why there are different flavors. If you look at the first party offer through AWS, it has some unique advantages. There are things that we do there because it's the one VMware manages. But if you take a look at AVS, it's different. It does things that AWS doesn't. GCP is the same. It's different. It does things that AVS in VMC doesn't. So, it's if one of them isn't appropriate, then we just point the customer wherever the most appropriate solution is.
Yeah. So last 10 minutes here, I want to sort of hone in for folks on what are some of the value adds that VMC can bring to the table now that it's coupled with NetApp storage. I mean, I know you highlighted SnapMirror earlier, and I always like to tell people it doesn't stop there. SRM works as long as you've got the link. If you've got the plumbing, you've effectively got a secondary data center. Between the AWS region that you're in and that. You can literally go and evacuate that colo and put it into AWS with VMC, and you can handle all your backup. SnapMirror, SnapVault, other things coming soon are going to be there. Like, it is a fully functional instance of ONTAP that's scalable across AZs. You can mirror across regions. You can be very prescriptive about your deployments of how you're going to put your data and your volumes in certain places, and you can delegate access to them appropriately for both your admins and for your end users. Full Active Directory integration. So it is all of the things that you would expect a NetApp storage array to be. And then you connect it up to your VMC environment, and you've got, I don't know how to get closer to an on-prem experience in the cloud than the relationship of VMC and FSx ONTAP. I've yet to see it.
Yeah, and if we're talking guest connected protocol storage, right?
Sure.
Like not coming through VMDKs, but an NFS SMB or iSCSI connection coming off the guest VM, then it is 100% like for like, one for one. There are no exceptions. Everything that you're doing on premises, you can do in the cloud, and you don't even have to change, right? You can continue to use your entire Snap suite with all the flexes and clones. Everything
All the
just
flex and
continues
snap
to,
words.
yeah. It's just everything works, which is exactly what you want to be able to say as a vendor, right? You don't ever want to have to come in and tell the customer, well, actually, we don't support that.
We're working on the last one. There's one missing right now, but give me a bit. We're almost there.
You guys, fairly recently, you launched a new product, which I actually was very excited to see come out. Disaster recovery orchestration is part of your Blue XP offer, which more or less makes SRM redundant, which is interesting. For something to do,
well,
it's
the
a very
SnapMirror SRA portion of it, sure, but you guys still orchestrate the stand up of the networking and the other pieces.
yeah
from an SRM perspective.
Yeah. It's still there's still some special sauce in there where you may need that technology, but for the most part, it's pretty agnostic.
I want to throw a question up here real quick from Aviv. Hi, Aviv from Tel Aviv. Says, which workloads make the most sense to run on VMC with FSxN? And I think we've talked about this a little bit. But yeah, do you find that there are certain workloads that run better than certain ones? Are you seeing more sort of tier one, or are we seeing more sort of commodity VMs that are getting thrown up there? Is it backup and recovery stuff? Is it lower hanging tier 2 stuff? Where do you see the bulk of the workloads that end up in VMC?
Yeah, so when it comes to VMware Cloud on AWS, the reality is just because the way that the licensing works and the way that the billing works, when right now today we only support HCI based hosts. So every time you get CPU and memory, it comes with a certain amount of storage, right? Yeah. And if you need any one of those three resources, the only way to get more is to buy a whole new host that comes with all three. So if you're buying hosts for CPU and memory reasons, and they just happen to come with storage that you can use for your virtual machines, that's great. But if you're buying hosts for storage purposes and you're having to purchase CPUs and memories, and you're having to purchase vSphere and vSAN licenses for those CPUs and memories, then it very quickly becomes not cost effective to operate. And those are the workloads where it becomes applicable for something like FSxN to come in and augment our SDDC and give us additional storage capacity so that we can right size the costs and bring those resources down. We don't see a divide between tier 1, tier 2, tier 0, whatever, right? Like FSx is programmable. You can go up to 4 gigs per second on a storage controller. Given our latest implementation, we can drive 1 gigabit per second to each host in your cluster. So if you had a 4-host cluster, you could drive a 4 gig per second file system to its knees. That's more performance than I see most workloads needing, being quite frankly. Like I've seen some customers come to me with a legit, like, hey, my database at peak is driving 2 gigs per second.
Yeah, we're beating the hell out of this thing. What do we do?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. They'll have a pair of all flash controllers behind it, and in those cases, it's like, here's this one database. We've got 3 arrays that drive it. It's like, okay, yeah, let's have a very careful conversation about how we might move this into a cloud environment. But for the most part, it is a very simple sizing exercise where you start with just CPU and memory based sizing. How many hosts do you need for that? And then augment that with however additional storage capacity is required. And then performance is just a sizing exercise to figure out how big of a controller you need. And the best part about this from an FSx standpoint is this isn't a critical decision that you have to get right at deployment,
No.
right? It's like when vol move first became a thing, and you could just move a volume between data aggregates. All of a sudden, it didn't matter where you created the volume, right? There was once upon a time, where that was a big deal. You really had to think about where you were going to create the volume because it was super difficult to move it. Once that abstraction comes in and it's easy to change, the cost of making that or getting that wrong just goes way down. And that's the case here. You can dynamically increase or decrease performance on an FSx deployment. It's completely non-disruptive from the workload's perspective. It just does a failover, failback as it swaps out the controllers. And it makes it super easy from an operations perspective. At every single layer, right? If you have enough capacity, but you just need a little bit more disk IOPS, well, just go increase your disk IOPS, right? They're charged accordingly. Like, do you pay for it? Yeah, you pay for it, but it's not an arm and a leg, not compared to what it would cost to buy a whole shelf of storage, particularly. So I think it's very flexible, and the answer is whatever workload you're trying to move into the cloud. That's the workload that runs best.
Yeah. And it really, there's two choices. Do you want capacity or do you want performance? And you can stand up one of each. You can have, if you've got something that needs to be a little bit of both, you can certainly set up that sort of instance as well. There's so much, guys, we're just getting started with FSx. Like the future of that product is mammoth. The things that we're working on, like the next steps and the future stuff is that I can't talk about are awesome. I can't wait till we get to some of that point, but we are damn near feature complete with that thing. Like we are at a point now where we can get all but, with the tiny few exceptions, all but feature parity across the board. Everything you've come to know and love and expect from ONTAP is available to you in AWS. That's crazy to me. Like, I can remember 10 years ago we were trying to put Cloud ONTAP or whatever it was at the time, the vSim, in an EC2 instance. And I mean, I finally got it to work, and that was that ended up being some of the hands-on labs. Like those same principles ended up being some of the VMworld hands-on labs, or have allowed me to do that when I used to write those. But the fact that we're doing it now, not only fully functional, but as a managed service instead of just a virtualized V version, it's crazy to me. Look, we're out of time. Do you have some more time? I want to be conscious of that before. Do you have some more time to go? Because you were going down a path. I wanted to ask you one more question.
I can do one more.
Last year at VMware Explorer, when me, you, and Pete got on stage and we were doing our little interview for the Virtually Speaking show, one of the big things you were talking about was disaggregated storage. And you were going down the path a second ago of how VMC is still HCI concepts and it's still a linear scale thing. So if you add compute, you have to add storage and vice versa. Has FSx unlocked the need to continue to do that? Is there still an element of that goes on in VMC? Or how has, since VMworld last year, what are we, almost a year at this point,
Yeah.
How has the last year around disaggregated storage gone? Is there anything new you can talk about?
So external storage uptake and adoption inside VMware Cloud and AWS has taken off like a rocket ship. The biggest inhibitor is upgrades. You have to get upgraded to at least our 1.20 release in order to be able to attach a data store, and we still have some customers who are waiting to go through that upgrade so that they can get access. But as the fleet has been upgraded to a compatible version, we've just seen a natural ripple of right sizing where customers will bring a data store in, they'll take one or two hosts out, they leave with a bill that's $4,000 less than it was the month prior, and everyone's happy, right? Like there's no change in capabilities. They just lowered their cost a little bit by right sizing those resources, and only paying for the licensing that they actually require.
So the over-provisioning of resources in that linear scale scenario is a very real thing, is what I was trying to highlight. And by going to an FSx option, you can downsize the necessary, likely over-provisioned compute nodes.
Again, just being transparent, prior to external storage, we didn't have the ability to entertain petabyte scale workloads. Right, customers who had a petabyte of data, we could give you a quote, but nobody was ever going to pay for it.
Right.
Like nobody could ever afford it, because when you think about having to license, that many hosts with vSphere, with vSAN, with NSX, and you're only using the storage, you're not doing anything else on the hardware. It's just it's too expensive. Now, if you're using the CPU or memory, then, and you block your ears, Nick, vSAN is some of the most cost competitive storage you can get in the EC2 cloud, but only if you're using the CPU and memory. So has it fundamentally changed the reality for us? Of course it has, right? We now have the ability to theoretically, we could look at a host that didn't have vSAN. It's not something that's immediately on our plate. We're still with our i4i host, our i3EN host that we build on top of today. Those are still HCI based deployments, but we come at it a completely different way. Whereas previously, 80% of our sizings were storage bound. So at the end of the day, when you got a host count and you deployed an SDDC, the number of hosts that you were purchasing was based on the storage consumption of the workload.
It would be unfair of me not to echo that back to you guys as well. The marriage of VMC and FSx ONTAP has done wonders for us as well, from an adoption standpoint of FSx ONTAP, because it's one of those it's such a core foundational part of infrastructure today. Just like servers and direct attached storage and a certain thing was 20 years ago, it's now such a fundamental part of 80 to 90% of every single data center out there ever, that the ability to have those two things now in the cloud, in not just AWS either, guys. This is in Azure, this is in Google Cloud as well. The ability to do this stuff. So, the way that we've implemented it in AWS is special, and it's unlocked the door for adoption, and we've seen FSx ONTAP skyrocket. And of course, there's more use cases out there that people are using it for, whether it's managed SAP environments or things, whatever it might be. There's plenty of stuff out there that is just shooting that thing to the moon. But VMC is definitely one of those things that everybody asks about. Everybody wants to know more. Can I just vMotion my stuff from my on-prem data center into the cloud? Yes, you can.
Yes, you can.
And the minute I say that, you can see their just gears start going. And like I've said, as long as you've got the direct connect, whether it's managed through your colo, or whether you've gone through the motions of what we used to have to do 20 years ago with like a T3 and set it up yourself and hooked it all up and lit your own fiber, like whatever you've done to get that service and you've got it there, yes, it is literally an extension, a routed, I don't know what it ends up being, but you are just extending your on-prem facilities into the cloud, just like you would extending to a colo, for example. It's going to operate for you the same way from an administrative perspective. You can SSH to it. You can do all the things. You can use the cloud, the GUI if you want to. You can build your own homegrown management apps. You can use Terraform. You can use anything. All of it works, and it's just mwah! It's just so good. I'm so excited about it. If that wasn't apparent, and the future of customers discovering the power of VMware and NetApp in AWS is just going to grow and grow and grow from here on out.
Yeah.
Any final words, sir?
No, it was great to get back on with you, man. It's been too long since we talked. I'm gonna be out your way here for VMware Explore here next month, so we'll have to swing by the house and make sure we catch up once and for all.
Don't get too freaked out by the MSG sphere of it's not a vSphere, but they just call it sphere. And they've lit that thing up this week here in Vegas, and the Earth is cool, and the moon is cool, and we've been having some basketball stuff here. I think it's the summer event thing, and they'll turn it into a giant basketball, which is hilarious. However, there's one where they turn it into a blinking, like creepy horror eye. It's literally a giant eyeball, and it blinks at you and moves around and looks around.
No, thank you. No.
Thanks, I hate it. No, I don't need that kind of stuff. So be wary of that if you're flying into Vegas. We are full bore into event season at this point. So we got VMware coming up. We've got Insight in October. reInvent is happening in December as always, right after Thanksgiving. So we're kind of just going ham into events at this point. For everybody watching, listening, if you're flying into Vegas for one of those events, keep an eye out for the MSG Sphere. You won't be able to miss it. It's massive, and there's likely to be a giant eyeball blinking at you. So, with that, Glenn, thank you very much for joining me as always. I'm going to say a few final words here for the folks, but I agree with you. Thank you so much for being a part of this, and we definitely do need to do this kind of stuff more often, man. Thanks for being here, and I appreciate it.
All right. Bye, guys.
Well, guys, there we go. One more thanks to Mr. Glenn Sizemore. Really excited to have him on with us today. And there's never a question that the two of us can just rap for hours on end about any sort of technology or any of that kind of stuff. So very excited to always have him on as always. We'll have to figure out what Pete's doing one of these days and see if we can get him on here. Anyway, as I said at the top of the show, in case you missed it, early bird pricing is going on for Insight right now. You can find links to it over in Discord, or you can head to insight.netapp.com, and you can get a massive discount on your pass. I believe it's now, I don't know when it ends. It's going to end soon. It's going to go away at some point, but get in on it now. We did that intentionally for our OGs, for our big fans that knew they were going to be going to Insight. We wanted to make sure you guys got registered and got signed up. So insight.netapp.com, head over there, or come find us in Discord. We'll get you a link. You don't need any discount codes or anything like that. But you can leave a little note in there that Discord sent you. We'll love you for that. Speaking of Discord, come join us over at netappdiscord.com. You can find a quick link there. There's thousands of people in there. I think we're up to almost 4,000 people that are in there. We've got executives, employees, support staff. Some partners are in there. Glenn is in there, and other folks from AWS as well are also hanging out in there. So come join us. It's not a sales thing. Nobody's going to hit you up about anything. I'm just going to tell you to come to Insight. But no, if you have questions about any of the stuff that we talked about today or anything that's on any of the other episodes of the show, come hit us up. We've got a dedicated channel in there where you can chat with us or ask any other questions, and somebody from our product management, engineering, or executive team will get back to you right there in Discord. So come join us, netappdiscord.com. Follow us on all the socials. You guys know how to do that stuff in 2023 by this point. You can follow me over on my Data Center Dude YouTube channel or on TikTok. Yes, I'm doing TikToks now. TikTok.com/@DataCenterDude or whatever it is. Just look for Data Center Dude. You'll find me over there. But having some fun with that sort of stuff. Next week, back here with Mr. Andy Krudge. He's the Principal Product Manager for all things FSx ONTAP at AWS. So really looking forward to that one. Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Pacific. Make sure you join us. But until next time, take care.